Today, we are talking about a topic that is so close to my heart because this is something that will help you reclaim your radiance as a woman. It is something that helps you digest and release sexual shame, and it is something that will really transform all of the areas of your life because I think it's because you are working at self-love at the most deep and intimate level, and that is sacred sexuality. We're going to be talking all about unlocking the power of sacred sexuality today. So go ahead and grab a drink or grab a snack and get cozy with your headphones, and we are going to dive right in. Okay, so firstly, if you are new here, welcome to Openly Spoken. My name is Cilia, and Openly Spoken is the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen in healthy relationships. And I am a certified sex, love, and relationship coach. I also just like to call myself a self-love and relationship coach because I think sexuality falls into both categories. And with sacred sexuality, it's definitely like the deepest form of self-love. So sexuality is like underneath the umbrella of self-love and of relationships. And if this is not your first time here and you have not done so already, please give the podcast a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever it is that you might be listening, because this really helps us spread to more people that need the messages on this show. Okay, so if you've ever felt trapped in your head, which I know a lot of us ambitious women with also a history of toxic relationships, we kind of learn that it's unsafe to exist in our bodies. And so we get into this habit of feeling like we're trapped in our head. We get into like productivity. So if you've felt that way, if you felt disconnected from your body and unsure of what it really means to embrace your sensuality, then this episode is for you, my friend. Okay. And yeah. So I'm going to talk about why sacred sexuality is important, what it truly is, what's possible when you lean into it, and how you can start on your own journey. And at the end, I'm going to share a little free gift I have for you, which is a 7-day journal to help you connect to your sensuality. That will be in the show notes below. Okay, so let's first dive into why is sacred sexuality important? So why does it matter? I think the number one kind of like reason of why it matters is simply because our world is so fast paced at the moment. It's faster paced than it's ever been before. And many of us, especially us ambitious women, are taught to live in our heads. We're rewarded for our productivity, what we get done, what we achieve. We're rewarded for our intellect. And that all contributes to us living in our heads. And where does that leave our bodies? Where does that leave our emotions? Where does that leave our sense of pleasure? We kind of get cut off from those things. And from experiencing this myself and also helping many, many clients one-on-one, this makes us feel less alive. And that's why it just like breathes new life into us when we lean into sacred sexuality. The sacred sexuality is about reclaiming those parts of ourselves that society has taught us to suppress or ignore. It's about recognizing that our sexuality is not just physical, it's emotional, it's deeply spiritual, it's creative. It's so creative. And when you live disconnected from your sexuality, you miss out on an essential part of who you are. You can also have creativity blocks. You can, so this like disconnection of who you are and missing out on this essential part of who you are can manifest as burnout, lack of joy or motivation. It can make you feel very unfulfilled in your relationships, including the relationship with yourself. So this is some very, very important stuff. And some of my favorite authors that write about female sexuality are Sherry Winston and Emily Nagoski. So Sherry Winston she's the author of Women's Anatomy of Arousal. And in that book, she describes that a woman's sexual energy is intricately connected to her vitality. She says that it's the same energy that fuels our creativity, our self-expression, and even our ability to love ourselves and others deeply. And then Emily Nagoski, she wrote Come As You Are. She also wrote a book called Burnout that I think is really good. There's another book that very recently came out. I can't think of the title right now, but it's more about relationships. And Emily Nagoski in Come As You Are, she highlights how stress and shame block our access to pleasure. And when we lean into sacred sexuality, we get to dismantle those blocks. We get to create space for self-love, for joy, and for connection. So kind of in summary of this one little section of why sacred sexuality is important, it's like motorcycles speeding around outside. I don't know if the microphone's picking it up. But sacred sexuality is important because it's a pathway to feeling whole. It's a way to come home to yourself. It's a way to come home to your body. I think it really relieves the nervous system from all of the things that your body is carrying, all of the past experiences, feelings of feeling like unsafe in your body, feeling shame about your body. I think when you lean into sacred sexuality, it's such a spiritual experience to really realize how magical your body and your built-in capacity to access pleasure really is. And I would say it's this like deep spiritual awakening. If you've had a spiritual awakening before and you want another spiritual awakening that's deeper, I mean, once you've had one spiritual awakening, you're bound to have many, many more. But if sacred sexuality isn't something you've dove into before and you want a deeper spiritual awakening, this is definitely something to lean into. So what does sacred sexuality actually mean? Like, what is it? In my opinion, the way I would describe sacred sexuality is treating your sexuality as if it was something that was very sacred, that was worthy of reverence, and that is worthy of you taking the time as a woman to make space to experience it on your own rather than waiting to do that with a partner. So it's not about performance. It's not about pleasing other people. It's not about fitting into society's definition of what is sexy. It's not about following a specific practice or a specific belief system. It's a very personal journey about exploring your own relationship to your body, to your pleasure, and your unique expression of sensuality. And what's so beautiful about our bodies as women is there's so much variety when it comes to sensuality and sexuality. There's so much variety. There's so much variety in what we even look like anatomy wise. There's so much variety on what we can do to receive pleasure. There's so much variety in what we enjoy, what we don't enjoy. And so sacred sexuality really is about creating that deep, loving connection with yourself. I'd like to describe it as becoming your own lover. So like I said earlier, you're not waiting to receive pleasure from a partner. You're becoming your own lover. And that really sets the tone for relationships with others when it comes to intimacy. And if that's something that's like completely new to you, I would recommend to join my breast massage course, Heart Magic. As of the time of this recording, it is on waitlist, but in Heart Magic, it is a breast massage course, but it is also really set up for you to dive into breast massage if it's something you've never ever done before. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of things in there to resource you. There's a lot of mindfulness practices, embodiment practices to really help you grow your capacity to have more intimacy with yourself. And I think breast massage is a really kind of like less intimidating practice to start out with, rather than doing like a yoni egg practice or de-armoring or any of that other stuff. We'll get into some practices later on. Okay. So sacred sexuality really is a powerful source of pleasure and of wisdom. So I mentioned earlier that sacred sexuality can really help you with your creativity. And I think this wisdom piece is why when you do a sacred sexuality practice, it drops you out of your head, it gets you into your body, and you get into this state where you're very open for intuition to really drop in. And that is our deepest wisdom, right? Our intuition. And so what I've found over the years as I first started leaning into sacred sexuality practices in 2021, and I found that these practices really helped me be able to have like a well of creativity to write stuff. At that time, I was showing up very regularly on Instagram. And anytime I would have some sort of creative block, I would lean into a sacred sexuality practice. And right after the practice, I would just ideas would be flowing through me. I always had to have a journal for afterwards, and I would just write 5 pages straight. It was really, really cool. So sacred sexuality really is a sacred, powerful source of connecting to your own wisdom and your own intuition, your own creativity. So, for me, this whole journey really began with wanting to be more present when it came to intimacy, and realizing that I would go into my head and really wanting to, just basically drop more into my body and be more present. So one of the first things that I went into was this book called From Madness to Mindfulness. And it's by Jennifer Gonzalez. I think she's actually Dr. Jennifer Gonzalez. Let me look her up. And she spells Gonzalez like so uniquely. Yes, Dr. Gonzalez. Jennifer Gonzalez, PhD. So in her book, Madness to Mindfulness, she encourages you to bring mindfulness into sexuality, which basically is the essence of sacred sexuality. Like you don't need to call it sacred sexuality. I think it really is just like, how would I describe this? So we're all familiar at this point, most of us, with mindful practices, with yoga, with meditation. Think of sacred sexuality as yoga for your sexual side, because mindfulness is kind of more focused on, like meditation and breath work is a little bit more focused on the mind and observing your mind. With sacred sexuality, you are still observing the mind in a sense, but you're also observing what sensations do you feel? What desires do you have? And then there's also the mind part in it of like, what are your thoughts around your body? Like, what are your thoughts and beliefs about what your body looks like? What are your thoughts and beliefs of self-pleasure? Like, do you think it's something that is sinful? Do you think it's something that is bad? That's a very common, it's very also common for, like, I've had a few clients that feel that it's, their beliefs are like, oh, it's gross. It's not something that I should be doing because it's gross. So there is that part of mindfulness with looking at what do you think about certain things, and also just looking at what you think, so what your thoughts and beliefs are around sex in general. Like, what does sex mean to you? What did you learn about what sex is, or like what sexual expectations are expected of you from media, from, you know, sex education at school, or maybe a lack of sex education at school. What did you learn about sexuality from, you know, your family, your friends growing up? There really is a big mindset piece about it, to realize like, what are the beliefs that you are carrying. And however, sacred sexuality, you're not really going into the depths if you just stay at the mindfulness level, because your sexuality is an embodied thing. It's a primal energy in your body. It's not cerebral. And it could be cerebral for you right now because you're having a hard time being stuck in your head, maybe. But cerebral experiences with sexuality don't allow us that freedom to really let go, to really feel. Because when we are stuck in our heads, we're cut off from sensations, and there could be touches in certain parts of our body that we don't even notice or realize or feel, because we're so consumed with what's going on in our heads. So when we bring mindfulness to our sexuality, we start to see it as this really potent place to really heighten our self-worth, to really step into setting powerful boundaries. I think that's one of my favorite things about sacred sexuality. It really empowers you to step into your voice and your truth in a way that you might have never even done before. And I've experienced that personally myself, which is why I decided to become certified as a sex, love, relationship coach. Like, that was one of the biggest things where I was like, whoa, like, this is the thing to make women self-expressed. And my business is called Self-Expressed Babe, and that's what I'm here to do. So it can also be a very big, potent place to really just feel joy in the mundane moments. Because when we bring mindfulness into sexuality, we really learn how to slow down in the moment that we're in and notice every little thing that we feel. Like, you could even do that now as you're listening, just noticing what do you feel on the surface of your skin right now? Maybe you feel the air in the room that's around you. Maybe if you're driving, you can feel a breeze on your skin. Maybe you can feel the warmth of the sunlight on your skin. Sacred sexuality really helps you stop and slow down with all of those sensations. And I think the reason why that helps you expand your capacity for joy is because you realize that life is so abundant and you have so much pleasure and so much goodness to be grateful for at any moment, just by existing in your own body. Yeah, so sacred sexuality is a practice of self-discovery, basically. The deepest self-discovery, in my opinion, and the deepest form of self-love, because it's so intimate. It's the most intimate you can get with yourself. And these practices, which I'll get into more examples later on, but the practices will look different for everybody. Like, it doesn't have to involve sex toys at all. It can be like dancing naked in your bedroom. It can be like skinny dipping in the jacuzzi. It can be journaling about what things what beliefs you picked up in your, as you were in your upbringing, and then what beliefs you want instead. Like, there's so much variety, and there's also so much, what's the word I'm looking for? What I'm trying to say is, because of the variety, you don't want to push yourself into a practice that feels too much for your nervous system. So you don't want to go straight into working with a yoni egg if you've never done that before. Like, there are ways to ease into it. And an example of how to ease into practice, I'll just pull from my, like, honestly personal experience. So in 2021, I joined a yoni egg course. And when I got we used borosilicate glass. Another, kind of, what is that called? Unpopular opinion that I have is don't use any kind of crystals. That's just my personal preference, because crystals have micro cracks, and crystals, it's very hard to really source where they come from. And because of that, there is the risk that there could be lead in your crystals. So please don't use any kind of crystal sex toys. Like, I am fully against that. Okay, so when I got that glass yoni egg in the mail, when it finally arrived, I was like, oh my God, I am not putting this in my body. And I listened to that. I didn't force anything. And with the practices, so the course that I was in had practices that were like audio files. And I give this advice as well in my Heart Magic breast massage course. With the audio files, at first, I would just listen to them without following along. That way, the next time I listened to it, I knew what to expect, so it felt safer for me to, it feels safer to follow along with the practice when you know what's going to happen, rather than if it's a complete mystery and you already have some resistance to that practice, because sacred sexuality practices can be very scary when you're diving into it for the first time, especially with women who, and I myself am one of those women who have grown up being taught that sex and sexuality is something bad and naughty and shameful. So it can be very, like, terrifying to dive into that. So listening to the audio is one thing. Another thing that I also tell people is, when you are following along with the practice, let's say you're listening to the audio, it's the second time you're listening to it, and you're finally practicing along with it. If at any time you notice that it's a little too much, or you're going in your head rather than being in your sensations, stop what you're doing. You can turn the audio off if you want, or you can just stop following along and continuing to listen to the audio. So it really is about giving yourself the permission to do what it is that you need to do to honor your integrity, your self-love, to honor what is actually true in your body, rather than trying to push your way through it. And I think that's a big challenge for us ambitious women. We're so used to hustling and pushing through, but sacred sexuality really gives us that opportunity to soften And what's so beautiful about that, like I mentioned earlier in this episode, that sacred sexuality really transforms the rest of your life. For us ambitious women who are used to that hustle, when we lean into sacred sexuality practices, just like with yoga, how you notice yoga showing up for you off of the mat, sacred sexuality is the exact same. We start to then, with our goals, instead of hustling and pushing through, we find a little bit more of a balanced way to move and to take action in our journeys to reach our goals. So we learn how to have a little bit more balance between work and play, work and personal time when we lean into sacred sexuality. Yeah. And then it can also be very helpful when it's new. This is just like the one last thing that I'll give for things you can do to really ease into it. It could be very helpful to have extra support, like a coach or a therapist, just to have someone to really hash things out with and someone to have on your side just for that extra level of support. Okay, so next I'll talk a little bit more about what's possible when you lean into sacred sexuality. We talked a little bit about this already, but let's take a moment to really just dream and to see what is actually possible. So imagine that you wake up in the morning and you feel completely at home in your body. You're completely just at ease. You look in the mirror and you love what you see. You see someone that is radiant, that is magnetic, someone that when you catch her eyes in the mirror, you just smile and you're like, "Good morning, beautiful." And this person is someone that you deeply adore. That deep self-love is what's possible. You start to notice your body not as something to criticize or not as a clay to mold to fit the current beauty standards. You start to see your body as something to celebrate, something to honor, something that you can be so grateful for, because this body is what gives you the ability to experience all of life. I have goosebumps as I speak to this, because it really is the deepest level of self-love you can experience directly from leaning into sacred sexuality or mindful sexual practices with yourself. Another thing that is possible when you embrace sacred sexuality is, like I said earlier, empowered boundaries. You get to become more in tune with what feels good for you. So you also notice like what you like and what you don't like. So something that's a very common struggle with some of my clients is they don't know how to tell their partner what they like, because they're so used to, that history of toxic relationships where they've had partners who just kind of take the lead in the bedroom without asking, what do you like? What do you not like? They just go. And so leaning into sacred sexuality gives you that like personal knowledge of what it is that you enjoy in the bedroom. And then you become more in tuned of what feels good for you, both physically, emotionally, and also energetically. And you really gain that confidence to say yes or no from a place of love. And I think the reason why that yes and no, that like confidence to say yes and no really arises is because you learn from a very subtle level what your body is a yes and a no to. So what I mentioned earlier about easing into the sacred sexuality practices, where I said you can listen to an audio without following along, or you can stop mid-practice, that is a practice in honoring your no. And when you can honor what you are a no to, then what you are a yes to has space to show up. And I think it's because at the very deep level, your body is learning to trust you, and your body's learning to trust your brain. And that just like deeper knowledge of yourself comes up. And then another thing that is possible when you lean into sacred sexuality is probably one of my favorites is deeper relationships. And this is both in friendship and also in romance, because your capacity for intimacy expands because in your personal relationship with yourself, there is more intimacy present. So that's like that thing where they say, fill your cup and then the overflow is available for other people. When you have more intimacy for yourself, you have an abundance of intimacy and you are able to have intimacy with other people. And intimacy, just in case there's some people listening who think that some people think that intimacy means sex, and it does not mean sex. Intimacy means just being able to have really deep closeness with people. So with your friendships, when you notice your capacity for intimacy growing, you will notice that you are able to get more vulnerable and really have deeper conversations and stuff like that. You get to show up more fully, you'll take up more space without being scared, and you have more trust in the relationships that you have. It's kind of like the complete opposite of codependency, like as far away from codependency as you can get. Okay. Another thing that is possible when you embrace sacred sexuality, this is also one that we mentioned before, is creative freedom. So your sexual energy is also your creative energy. With sexual energy, that's how we create humans. And from an energetic level, just bringing out my past yoga teacher here, the second chakra, the sacral chakra, is the chakra that is in charge of both sexuality and creativity. So it's definitely very linked energetically. And when you tap into it, you might find yourself writing, like how I mentioned with the practices that I would do. I would have to have a journal and just write 5 pages all at once. You also might find yourself painting, or what's also really fun is you can realize new possibilities in your life. So you can get creative about beliefs. And what I mean about that is you might go into a practice with the intention of digesting a limiting belief or feeling into the emotions underneath the limiting belief. And then after a practice, this new kind of truth intuitively comes in and is like, well, actually, this thing here is also possible, is also true. And I think the mindset work can definitely be it's definitely a creative thing. And I don't really hear people talking about how that's like tapping into creativity. So one more thing that I will mention about what's possible when you embrace sacred sexuality is just this deep sense of freedom, because sacred sexuality practices really help you digest shame. It helps you release shame. It helps you reclaim your radiance. It helps you step into your magnetism and step into your power, because in these practices, you are practicing showing up for yourself in a way that really honors all parts of you. And then that just really fills you with so much confidence to then show up in the world as your truest self. And it really releases so much societal expectation and conditioning. And it's the absolute best. So this journey really is it's so much more than just sex. It's about reclaiming your innate worthiness that you were born with. It's about reclaiming your wholeness. It's about stepping back into how radiant and magnetic you were always meant to be and you always were. There was just this layer kind of like on top of you that made you forget it. I like to say that with this work, that my favorite thing is to help women step into a new identity that isn't actually new because it's who they were the entire time. And that really is the essence of what sacred sexuality can do for you. I have goosebumps again. This is such powerful stuff. So let's dive into a little bit on how you can get started on your sacred sexuality journey. I hope that so far you have felt inspiration to really get started and dive into these things. So step one is to connect with your body and start small. So this can be, if you're not someone that already does mindfulness practices, it can be leaning into mindfulness practices finally and doing them regularly, doing them daily. The magic really is in the daily. So it's much better to do breath work for like 2 minutes every single day than it is to do breath work for 10 minutes once a week. It's the daily practice that is going to help you fill your cup and have spillover, so that that spillover can then transform all of the other areas of your life, so that you can have that like off the mat experience of a mindfulness practice. And what I mean off the mat, that's like, I don't know if that's something that only yoga teachers say, but off the mat, when a yoga teacher says off the mat, we really just mean how the mindfulness that we are purposely practicing on a yoga mat then starts to be something that we kind of habitually do without purposely doing it in our everyday life. And the off the mat moments are really moments where you really feel like, oh, wow, like my life is changing from this practice. So yeah, I could go down a whole tangent there. So connecting with your body can also be doing some slow sensual movement. So like putting on a song that helps you, that makes you feel sexy, and just like moving really slow to it. It can be something like stretching. It could be something like just when you do the movement and then like to a song, seeing if you can slow that movement down and seeing how slow you can go and how much you can pay attention to every movement. I'm like slowly swaying as I say that. Okay, step 2 after connecting with your body is to explore self-touch. And self-touch does not have to be sexual. It can be something as simple as massaging your hands, massaging your feet, placing your hands over your heart as you take a deep breath. It can be, one of my favorites is just taking your fingertips and very, very lightly touching your arms or your legs, or going through your entire body with a very light touch, and really breathing and being very present with it. And the goal of self-touch is to build that loving relationship with your body. So then when you are ready to move into something more sexual, if self-touch isn't something that is regular, like a regular thing that you're doing, I would again recommend breast massage, and I will put the link to Heart Magic in the caption. And I will also say, even if self-touch or masturbation is something that you already regularly do, I think the magic with diving into sacred sexuality is that if we already have a self-touch practice, we learn how to make that practice more mindful. We learn how to slow down. We learn how to not be super fast, because I think in media, sexuality is really based on male sexuality, and it's not based on female sexuality. So you'll see like heterosexual couples in shows like Bridgerton is coming to mind, where they're just like kissing and then like suddenly they're just like ready and like within 5 minutes it's done. Like that's not really realistic for female sexuality. Yes, that can happen sometimes, but that's the only example given in media, and that's just not accurate. And so even if pleasure practices are something that is already regular for you, it's something that you already do, I would really recommend leaning into slowing it down with sacred sexuality practices. So that's how you can get started on this journey with this step 2 of self-touch, even if self-touch is already something that you are doing. Okay, step 3 would be to journal about your desires. So really asking yourself, what brings me pleasure? What makes me feel alive? What would it look like to feel fully expressed in my sensuality? I think what's something that's also very potent is to journal about things you want to celebrate from your self-touch practices and even from your practices of connecting to your body. Like after each practice, take a moment to go to your journal and think of 3 things that you are celebrating for the practice today. I feel like that really adds motivation to go back in and do the practices again. Step 4 is to educate yourself. Our society is so uneducated about the female body and female sexuality. And a very great book, I think the best book that I have read so far to educate yourself on female sexuality is Women's Anatomy of Arousal, and it's by Sherry Winston. There's a ton of stuff in there that when I was in my sex, love, and relationships coaching certification, we had to read this book, and then right after the live cohort ended, me and like 5 other women, we read the book again together with an online book club, and all of us were, there was one girl that was younger than me, but only by like 6 months. So that means all of us were at least 34 years old, all the way up to like 40, early 40s. And every single one of us learned something new about our bodies. We all were like, wow, I didn't know that that was a thing. And so I really, really highly recommend picking up Women's Anatomy of Arousal. And if you've already read it, I recommend, if you have a partner that is not a woman, if you have a partner that's a man, make him read that book so that he knows he knows more about your body and he knows how to be the best lover to you. Okay. Step 5 is a little bit similar to the connecting with your body, but it's practicing mindfulness. So again, leaning into meditation, leaning into yoga, leaning into really paying attention to all 5 senses, all 5 of your senses throughout your day. And this is going to be a very great tool to stay present in your body. Step 6 is joining a community or finding some sort of support. So working with a coach like me, working with a sex therapist, or getting together a group of girlfriends that have the same goal of wanting to reconnect to their radiance and dismantle shame. Like the more women that you have to talk to about these things, it really amplifies your progress in this journey. Another good thing is you could do a book club, like I said about Women's Anatomy of Arousal. Doing a book club that is themed around books that will educate you about female sexuality is also a really great way to go, because it fosters conversations and it really helps you like know that you're not alone in this journey. It's very helpful when you learn something new to know that there are other women out there who also didn't know that thing, because sometimes it can feel a little bit like, oh, how can I not know this? So yeah, I hope that all of these tips can really help you get started on that female sexuality journey to really dive into sacred sexuality and to reclaim your radiance, to release all of that shame. And if this episode resonated with you, I will pop in the caption or the show notes a free 7-day journal that's designed to help you reconnect to your sensuality. And it's full of prompts and exercises in there, and it's specifically designed for busy women. So if that calls to you, you can download that free. The link will be below. That is all I have for today. And if you love this episode, I'd be so grateful if you would share it with a friend and leave a review. All right, we will see you next time. Bye.